for the opportunity to speak today, and I want to say thank you to the law enforcement and victims advocates for your hard work and the task that you do on a daily basis to bring justice and to bring peace to our community. And it's a great privilege to be here partnering with you to bring comfort and hope to these who are victims. I know what it is, a little bit about what it is to experience being a victim of crime, of negligence, of hardship. As most of you know, in 2011 on March 19th, we were involved in the train accident in Cleveland Park. And that experience in the weeks and the months to come really brought out a lot of the feelings that many victims, I'm sure, have when we were told after all the investigations were over that there was not going to be any criminal prosecution of anyone. And I remember reading that letter and feeling the sting of maybe putting your hope in the wrong things, you know, that maybe justice would be done in some way and that way, and then feeling the sting of, you know, you can't really have hope in that sometimes. And sometimes that's the way it feels. It feels that you can't trust human hope. But as I worked through that personal pain, the Lord really brought me back to the story of Joseph in the Bible. And there's probably no clearer victim in the Bible than Joseph. He was abused by family members. They wanted to get rid of him because they felt like he was favored as a brother. And all those brothers got together and they hatched a plot. They threw him in a pit, you remember, and they sold him as a slave. He was taken down to Egypt and he was sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of the guards, the Bible says. And he was a slave in Potiphar's home. And shortly after that, for whatever reason, Potiphar's wife became very interested in Joseph and began to try to seduce him. And when Joseph did not agree with that plan that she had, she slandered him and accused him falsely, and he ended up in prison for a number of years. And after being falsely imprisoned, he was forgotten for many years. So the whole period of time between the teenage years of Joseph's life until he was on up into adulthood, he experienced what it was like to be a victim and to feel injustice and to feel that you could not always trust the hope that you have in human beings. But in all of that, he always kept his faith in God. And there's several things that really stick out to me in Joseph's life that really become clear at his death that will help us to maintain hope even when we're victims. Genesis 50 says this: as Joseph was dying, he says this to his brothers. He says, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." You know, as I finished reading through the life of Joseph, and I preached through the life of Joseph a couple of months before the train accident, which I believe the Lord led me to do that to prepare me as much as anybody for what was about to happen in March. As I went back through the life of Joseph, I thought about this and what it says in Exodus chapter 13 and verse 19. As Moses, 400 years later, was leaving Egypt, it says, "Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under a solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." You know, I thought about how Joseph lived and died with hope, and how a message in all of our bones. You know, you carry a bone box around. There's something in your life, there's some pain in your life that you carry around. I carry it around. And in the midst of that bone box, we can communicate pain, and we can communicate tragedy, but we can also communicate hope. And there's three things I want you to see from this text today, just briefly, about the message of Joseph's bone box. The first thing I want you to see here is that life's expectations don't always match circumstances. We all have expectations, we all have dreams, we all have hopes. We all have things that we think are going to happen, or we hope that will happen. Sometimes our circumstances just don't match that. Things happen. We live in a bad world. We live in a fallen world where good things happen on a daily basis and bad things happen on a daily basis. You know, I had to come to the realization that Ron Dunn says in his book, when heaven is silent, he says this. He said, I came to a realization that you could trust God and still be hurt. And you know, the theology of that is this. We live in a fallen world, and as believers and unbelievers, we suffer together. The results are what really comes out of that. You know, we suffer through bad circumstances, disease, accidents, crime, but that's not the whole story. You know, Joseph began his discussion with his expectation as he was dying. He said, I'm dying. I'm not going to be able to go back home. You know, after all of these years, he left his homeland as a teenager, as a slave. He died in Egypt in the same position. I'm not going back home, but God will visit you. Life's expectations don't always match our circumstances, and that's the story of every victim. You know, the hopes and dreams can be dashed in just a moment, can't it? You know, there's several pictures that I keep around me all the time, and one is Benji helping put together Hannah's crib. Hannah's about to turn 5 this month, but he helped me put together her crib just about 2 weeks before he was killed. You know, that picture is a story of our expectation. Now, he had an expectation, I had an expectation that he would see in just a few weeks his sister born. You know, another picture that I keep around my desk all the time is this picture here. And it's Benji and Trey Burgess. And boy, Trey looks like a baby in that picture, doesn't he? But this picture was taken 4 minutes before Benji died. The timestamp on it says 11:59. It was really 12:59. I think the 911 call came in at 1:04 p.m. And you know, I look at this picture and I think about all the expectations of that day that changed in just a moment. You know, that was the story of Joseph. He still trusted God even though his expectations did not match the end circumstances. And that's the story of every victim. Secondly, I want you to see that life's circumstances must be contrasted with God's power to work for good. You know, God allowed Joseph to be a victim, to be sold into slavery, to be slandered, to be falsely accused, to be imprisoned falsely, to work for years and years as a slave under Pharaoh. Even though he was second to the throne, he was still a slave to Pharaoh. All of those years, and then at the end of his life he says, I'm dying. I'm going to die where I was sold into slavery. But, you know, we think about that statement and we go backwards a little bit in that same text. Joseph says to his brothers,